In the first half of the 19th century, Japan was a world locked away from time, an agrarian nation shaped by rice fields, tradition, and a rigid social hierarchy. Tens of millions of farmers worked endlessly, feeding the country and supporting a deeply layered social structure. Above them lived the samurai class, centuries earlier the sword-bearing elite, but by this period largely transformed into administrators and clerks. With no great wars left to fight, many samurai exchanged their blades for brushes, serving in bureaucratic roles rather than on battlefields. Yet despite their prestige, both farmers and samurai found themselves increasingly indebted to a group that Japan's Neo-Confucian order placed at the bottom of society: the merchants. This merchant class, though officially low in status, had gained enormous financial power. They controlled trade centers, sold rice, lent money to samurai and daimyos, and quietly became the economic engine of the nation. Their rising influence clashed with the social hierarchy. For the Tokugawa shogunate, taxing commerce seemed unthinkable. It would elevate the merchants and diminish governmental authority. This refusal to adapt left Japan's treasury chronically empty. Shoguns were forced to debase coinage to repay debts, causing inflation and economic instability. Samurai stipends lost value, their loyalty wavered, and unrest spread through the countryside. Japan's ancient structure was beginning to crack. But internal pressure was only part of the crisis. External forces soon crashed into Japan's shores. Since 1633, Japan had adhered to sakoku, a policy of strict isolation. Foreigners were forbidden entry, Japanese citizens were banned from leaving, and only carefully controlled Dutch and Chinese trade was allowed. For 2 centuries, this isolation maintained social harmony and preserved culture. But it left Japan woefully unprepared for the Western imperial expansion of the 19th century. The outside world grew increasingly interested in Japan. Russian explorers moved into the northern islands of Sakhalin and the Kurils. British warships threatened Japanese harbors. Foreign whaling vessels appeared more frequently. To defend its borders, the shogunate issued the Edict to Repel Foreign Ships in 1825, ordering coastal defenses to fire on any approaching vessel. The Japanese public, influenced by stories of Western aggression in China during the Opium Wars, supported the stance. Suspicion and distrust toward foreign powers intensified. Meanwhile, the United States looked westward across the Pacific. American whalers and traders wanted safe ports, and American diplomats wanted to secure economic opportunities. After repeated diplomatic attempts failed, the U.S. government decided to force the issue. In 1853, Commodore Matthew Perry sailed into Edo Bay with a fleet of imposing black steamships. Their cannons, smokestacks, and industrial appearance shocked Japan. The message was clear: open your ports or face consequences. The shogun knew resistance would lead to catastrophe. After tense negotiations, Japan agreed to open 2 ports for American trade. Other Western nations, seeing Japan's vulnerability, followed quickly with their own demands. A series of unequal treaties stripped Japan of tariff autonomy, granted foreign citizens legal immunity, and opened economic zones under foreign control. Japan had become a semi-colonial state, subject to foreign influence and humiliation. This humiliation ignited a fire within Japan. The Sanono Joy movement, revere the emperor, expel the barbarians, gained widespread support. Samurai radicals attacked foreign ships and Western residents, hoping to restore Japan's sovereignty. In response, Western powers bombarded Kagoshima and occupied the strategic Shimonoseki Strait in 1863. Instead of intimidating the Japanese, these attacks only deepened the belief that the shogunate had failed to defend the nation. Many began to argue that Japan's salvation lay not with the shogun, but with the emperor. As pressure mounted, political factions maneuvered for power. When Tokugawa Yoshinobu, the final shogun, attempted to negotiate a peaceful restoration of imperial rule, radicals from Satsuma and Choshu acted first. They seized the imperial palace in Kyoto and declared the beginning of a new government, the Meiji Restoration of 1868. Tokugawa loyalists refused to stand down. The Boshin War erupted between forces loyal to the old shogunate and the new imperial army. Although the shogunate had centuries of history behind it, the new imperial faction proved more organized and decisive. After a series of battles, the Tokugawa forces collapsed. The old system, the shogunate that had ruled Japan since the early 1600s, was dismantled. The young Emperor Meiji assumed full authority, although real power remained in the hands of an oligarchy of reform-minded nobles and samurai from the victorious clans. Their mission was nothing short of revolutionary: transform Japan into a modern nation capable of standing toe-to-toe with the great powers of the world. The Meiji government's determination to transform Japan reached every corner of society. One of the most dramatic changes involved the military. The centuries-old samurai class, once the elite defenders of Japan, faced the end of their way of life. The new government introduced universal conscription based on Western models, meaning ordinary farmer sons could become soldiers, something unthinkable in the old era. Samurai stipends were abolished, their right to carry swords was restricted, and their former privileges dissolved. This sparked resentment and eventually armed uprisings, most famously the Satsuma Rebellion of 1877, led by the legendary Saigo Takamori. A symbol of the old Japan, Saigo rallied thousands of samurai in an attempt to restore their honor and influence. But the new imperial army, trained by Western advisors and armed with modern rifles and artillery, defeated the rebels. The age of the samurai ended on the hills of Kyushu. The message was clear: Japan's future lay in modernization, not tradition. With domestic resistance crushed, Japan expanded outward. In 1874, after 54 Ryukyuan sailors were killed by Taiwanese tribes, Japan launched a punitive expedition against Taiwan. This mission demonstrated Japan's growing military capabilities and signaled its willingness to act as a regional power. Soon after, Japan formally annexed the Ryukyu Kingdom, integrating the islands as Okinawa Prefecture. In 1875, the Treaty of St. Petersburg saw Japan trade its claims over southern Sakhalin in exchange for full control of the Kuril Islands, refining borders with Russia. Japan also expanded into the Pacific, colonizing the Ogasawara Islands in 1875, the Volcano Islands, including Iwo Jima, in 1889, and Minami Torishima in 1898. By the 1990s, Japan's modernization had accelerated beyond what most Western observers believed possible. The Imperial Japanese Army, or IJA, had become the most advanced army in Asia. The Imperial Japanese Navy, built with British and French technology, rivaled European fleets in training and firepower. But Japan's eyes were fixed on Korea, a strategically vital peninsula long under China's influence. Japanese leaders believed that whoever controlled Korea would control the security of Japan itself. Tensions escalated in 1894 when the Donhak Rebellion erupted in Korea. The Korean government, overwhelmed, called for Chinese assistance. Japan responded immediately, sending troops under the pretext of stabilizing the region. When Japanese forces occupied Seoul and installed a pro-Japanese government, the long-simmering rivalry between Japan and the Qing dynasty exploded into war. Japan's strategy was bold and modern. First, cripple China's Beiyang fleet to gain control of the seas. Second, land troops swiftly and push Chinese forces out of Korea. As Japanese soldiers advanced through Korea toward Pyongyang, the IJN sought a decisive clash. On September 17, 1894, while the IJA seized Pyongyang, the Japanese Navy met the Beiyang fleet at the Battle of the Yalu River. The Chinese fleet was utterly defeated. The Japanese naval victory shocked Western powers, proving that an Asian nation could match and surpass modern Western militaries. With command of the sea, Japanese forces invaded the Liaodong and Shandong peninsulas. They captured Daiyen, Lushun, and Wei-He-Wei, opening the way toward Beijing. China sued for peace. The Treaty of Shimonoseki of 1895 forced China to cede Taiwan, the Penhu Islands, and the Liaodong Peninsula. China also recognized the total independence of Korea, effectively handing Japan dominance in the region. But Japan's triumph triggered jealousy in Europe. Russia, backed by France and Germany, intervened and pressured Japan to return the Liaodong Peninsula. Humiliated, Japan complied. Months later, Russia seized the same territory and leased Port Arthur from China. Japan felt betrayed. The triple intervention burned deeply into the Japanese psyche and fueled a determination to grow stronger, militarily, industrially, and diplomatically. Japan's rapid modernization continued. Its economy industrialized at breakneck speed. Factories multiplied, railways spread, steel production surged, and shipyards expanded. Militarists gained influence, arguing that Japan must secure resources abroad to sustain its growth. Diplomatically, Japan forged the Anglo-Japanese alliance in 2002, gaining recognition from a major Western power and ensuring that no European coalition could repeat the betrayal of 1895. Meanwhile, Russia tightened its grip on Manchuria after the Boxer Rebellion, refusing to withdraw troops despite international agreements. But Russia's hold was fragile. The Trans-Siberian Railway was incomplete. Russian forces were scattered and poorly supplied. Japanese intelligence operatives active across Manchuria and Korea reported that Japanese forces outnumbered the Russians and had superior knowledge of the terrain. By 1903, Japanese leaders believed they could win a war against Russia. Diplomatic negotiations failed, and in February 1904, Japan took decisive action. Without waiting for a formal declaration of war, Japanese torpedo boats attacked Russian ships at Port Arthur. The Russo-Japanese War had begun. Under Admiral Togo Heiichiro, the IJN blockaded Russian forces, allowing the Japanese army to land on the Korean peninsula. The IJA quickly occupied Korea, crossed the Yalu River into Manchuria, and laid siege to Port Arthur. The fortress endured months of heavy fighting, but in early 1905 it finally fell. The victory crippled Russian power in the region. Russia attempted to send reinforcements. The Baltic Fleet embarked on a nearly worldwide journey to reach the Pacific. But exhaustion, poor training, and logistical failures left the fleet weakened. When it reached the Tsushima Strait, Admiral Togo was waiting. On May 27, 1905, the Battle of Tsushima unfolded in a blaze of gunfire and smoke. The Japanese fleet destroyed or captured almost the entire Russian squadron. It was one of the most decisive naval battles in history, and a moment that stunned the Western world.
Russia, humiliated and facing internal unrest that would soon erupt into revolution, agreed to negotiate. The Treaty of Portsmouth, brokered by U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt, ended the war. Russia ceded South Sakhalin, withdrew from Manchuria, and acknowledged Japan's dominance over Korea. By 1910, Korea was formally annexed by Japan. Japan had risen from centuries of isolation and forged through relentless modernization to a modern empire capable of defeating a European great power. Its victory shattered Western assumptions about Asian nations and marked the beginning of a new geopolitical era in the Far East. Japan's rapid ascent reshaped global politics and laid the foundations for the larger conflicts that would define the 20th century. Born from centuries of isolation and forged through relentless modernization, the Japanese Empire had emerged as a formidable force, one whose influence would continue to expand, transforming the balance of power across Asia and the Pacific.